I wanted to end this process because it's going nowhere. It's a dead end. We said 2 weeks ago, the party leadership and other members said that we did not want to get into this whole defunding Obamacare, threatening to shut the government down. They got forced into it by the Ted Cruz wing of the party, people who are more loyal to Ted Cruz than they are to what the Republican leadership wanted. People who often don't vote with the leadership, but they wanted loyalty on this for themselves. So, and then I voted for the last several times to send this over to the Senate because I was assured that was a way to get the process going, and ultimately the government would not shut down.
It's unnecessary, and I am afraid that the American people, as they have in the past, will blame Congress, i.e. Republicans.
Peter King and John McCain there, of course, both outspoken, and in this case, both poking at their own parties. Believe me, they're critical, obviously, of Obamacare. They're no fans of it, but they're just as critical of the process and the politics that have come down within their own party and the GOP strategy to shut the government down over this. And they're not alone. Pat Meehan, Republican from Pennsylvania, calling for a clean resolution that doesn't defund Obamacare but reopens the government. And we're hearing the same thing from Scott Riggle, a Republican out of Virginia. Now, California Republican Devin Nunes, he likens the state of the GOP in this to the character Long Duck Dong from the movie 16 Candles, saying, "That's going to be us tomorrow, waking up on the grass, crashed automobile, that is us." He also went on to say that he thinks the GOP is acting, and again, these are his words here, like lemmings with suicide vests. They have to be more than just a lemming because jumping to your death is not enough, end quote. He also went on to say, you have this group saying somehow if you're not with them, you're with Obamacare. If you're not with their plan, exactly what they want you to do, you're with Obamacare. It's getting a little old. So the question is this unity in the Grand Old Party on the shutdown starting to splinter, and how and when does this thing end? And for more, let's bring in our panel. Of course, Dominic Carter, political journalist, author, one of our favorites here, Chris Shays, former Connecticut congressman, distinguished fellow in public service at the University of New Haven, and our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman.
You said one of your favorites just because you had Jim Himes, who beat me in the last congressional race, and he's trying to suck up.
He was talking about Dominic.
Oh.
You know what?
Hey, yeah. We'll take your congressman, right?
I wouldn't go that far. No. So my question is, are we reading the tea leaves right, that there is splintering right now, and this thing's got days before enough Republicans say, I'm not down with this?
First off, I said there wouldn't be a shutdown, so there's a shutdown. And you know that a president's always going to win on a shutdown. And it's painful for me. I have to turn the TV set off. I can't watch it because they're all going to have to backtrack, and they're eventually going to have to, get a bill.
Well, you went through this in '96.
Right.
And if somebody picked up the phone and called you and said, what lessons learned here so we'll avoid the same mistakes, what would you have told them?
Well, first off, our dispute with the president was very different.
Yep.
It wasn't about, repealing the signature item that he won re-election on. And so, we didn't quite know how that was going to work out, but I remember people saying to me, stand tough, stand tough. And then as soon as it was shut down, I got a call from some of these very same people saying, I can't get into the park. And I said, yeah. And then someone else called me up, and I remember saying my daughter can't get her student aid money, which is a little more significant. But, you would know she would eventually get it. So right away, you start getting those calls. And you can be assured there are going to be enough people who just say, finally, let's move on. The only thing I can think of that would give some credit to this is that John Boehner said, I want you guys to experience this pain now, so we don't have it over something more significant, which is the debt ceiling.
You think that there may be a strategy of breaking the fever? It's safer to do this now than to wait till the 17th?
I don't think John could and would have called the question on this, but I think that he knows that if they feel the pain, because they all said we got to do it, he's backed them, he's stood by them, and he's going to say, guys, see what happened? And you want to do this with a debt ceiling?
Is that the only way to rein in the Tea Party in the GOP at this point, is to basically let them go so far into the quicksand that they start to sink?
Yeah. One of the things that people said is we want new members, you don't want the old-timers there. Well, the old-timers have a little bit of history.
Yeah.
And these are new folks, and they haven't experienced it, and they're going to go through it in a few days.
There is one ploy from Ted Cruz, and it's interesting. If there's one name you keep hearing from Democrats and some Republicans now, is the person, they don't direct their enmity to John Boehner here. They're looking to Cruz saying, how did a freshman senator here all of a sudden decide the litmus test? You got Democrats, I heard Durbin a few minutes before the show going, so let me understand this, because there's now, he's trying to do piecemeal approaches. We'll do clean resolutions on opening up, let's say, the parks, or we'll do a clean resolution on
right now.
Right,
Absolutely.
and they want to do piecemeal. And the White House isn't taking the bait here, because they're going to say, wait, Ted Cruz is going to pick and choose which programs are sufficient. He's making national policy. But that said, it's interesting. They're going after him, Andrew,
Well,
and I don't think that's coincidental.
Well, Ted Cruz, first of all, sort of did this to himself because he spent most of this summer on a bus tour. This is the House actually debating that open the parks and monuments bill, as it were. But Ted Cruz went around on a bus tour this summer into Republican-held districts and basically shut it down for Obamacare rallies. And a lot of Republicans felt like he pressured them into getting on board with this message. He also then put his foot in it by doing the 21-hour or the 24-hour non-filibuster speech last week in the Senate, which put all of the spotlight on him. But if you think about it,
he seemed to make a promise that says, guys, follow me. I figured this out. We're on the same page, the House and the Senate, and they couldn't have been on much different wavelengths.
Well, I think
so you got a lot of people felt that he left him at the altar.
He was a more visible and is a better spokesman for the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party than Michelle Bachmann is, or than Steve King is, or Louis Gohmert is. Those three are, they're a little nutty. Ted Cruz is at least, intelligent, speaks well, and is a good representative of the Tea Party ideology at this point. And also go back to Sandy. Go back to when he came to New York. You remember Peter King had it up to here with Ted Cruz on that fundraiser. So he's boxed himself in as a pretty good wrestling enemy, as it were.
We're getting the impression, thanks for the analogy, Andrew.
Yeah.
We're getting the impression here that there's going to be a meeting, Camp David, wherever, that the president and Republican Democratic leadership are going to get together in a couple days. Step out what that means for the layperson here who hasn't been through this. Are they trying to figure out a way to save face here for the GOP? What goes on when they close the door?
You know what? It's to the president's advantage to allow them to save some face. If he just sticks it in their face, then there'll be penalties that will arise in the future.
What can he give them?
He can just not beat them up. To start with.
Does that break the fever the way that we were talking before? I mean,
well, first off, you got a bunch of people who know that this is a dead end, so they're trying to figure out how to get out of it. So I think the fever is kind of breaking. Now the question is, how do some people save face? And it's, it's never wrong to save face when you help someone save face when you want.
Sure. Well, the thing is, we'll talk about Obamacare, Dominic, in a little bit, but to me, everybody agrees it's an imperfect piece of legislation. I think even the White House acknowledges they can find 2 or 3 things and let the Republicans propose them. And the White House will go along, get along, and say, okay, fine, we'll strip these things from the legislation. You win, okay? As a country, we're better off for it, but hopefully that staves up. What I'm petrified is we get to the 17th here, and this thing is they try and push it off for 2, 4, 6 weeks. I'm hearing from folks here. I saw Zandy from Moody saying, you cannot exaggerate the consequences if we screw around with the debt limit here. He goes, guaranteed recession. But more than that, the idea that the full faith and credit of the United States is now in question. Forget that you don't get the Social Security checks. You're not paying the student aid. I mean, just think of the insanity of all this stuff. He goes, you can't unwind that clock without real damage to a fragile economy. I think the president's got to do something here. Even if it's in his best interest to let this thing twist. We can't get to the 17th and this not be resolved.
You say the president's got to do something? I mean, I don't exactly know. I'm listening carefully to what the congressman is saying. I don't know what the president can really do. They have almost, and you were pointing to Ted Cruz as if it's a negative. He looks at what he's done as a positive.
Absolutely.
And remember, Richard, these folks, as much as we're critical tonight at this table, they're going back to their districts and they're high-fiving each other.
But they did see some math here. Republicans saw for the first time, when asked that generic question, and I'm told this carries weight here at the RNCs and the DNCs, if you were going to elect, just a broader thing, a Republican or a Democrat, who would you elect? Since in the last week, Democrats have picked up 6 points.
Yeah, no,
and that's the kind of thing, there's a time out here. We can win the Senate, Republicans are saying. We can win the Senate here. We might lose the House if we keep this crap up for the next year.
There's a basic concept that controversy is the enemy of the incumbent. And what some of these congressmen are finding is they may think, you may think they're high-fiving it, but they're getting some of their own supporters calling them up and saying, are you guys crazy? You know, they're getting that. They're not admitting they're getting it. So it's just kind of, you're going to see some changes.
And the best example, to your point, Andrew, is think about the Koch brothers for a minute. Everybody talks about the big money. I'm using them as an example. They may despise some of the bigger government programs, and they may have their own agenda. But at the end of the day, they know the consequences of screwing around with the debt limit. Forget what I think of them and everything. They're practical, and they're smart when it comes to running a business. Nobody, including every single financial institution in New York, is going to wait here until the 11th hour before they start saying, you guys are doing amateur hour. Stop messing and playing with fire. This is not something you pour gas on.
I don't know if it goes that far. Obviously, if the market starts to get impacted by the threat of a debt default.
And it clearly wasn't spooked today. Yep.
Right, it clearly wasn't today, but everybody expects that as we get closer to the 17th, the markets will start to sell off, as they did the last time that we had this crisis a couple of years ago. About the Koch brothers, though, I keep thinking about those 11 different provisions that Republicans in the House put forward last week in exchange for the debt limit. It's one thing for the government shutdown, it's Obamacare. It's 11 different demands for the debt limit. It's Obamacare, plus it's the Keystone Pipeline, plus it's EPA regulations, plus it's clean air regulations, plus it's offshore oil drilling. You mentioned the Koch brothers. They have a lot of fingers in a lot of those different things that are being demanded. So I don't know if it goes that far.
Yeah, but you've just given an example. I mean, the president could give him Keystone because he should.
Well, we could have that fight all day long if you wanted to. I disagree, but and a lot of Democrats disagree.
But can he be seen as capitulating at this point? I know I'm with you that it's in his best interest, not just the Republicans, to let him win a little face, because just think about the next time they want to stick it in. But
he's the President of the United States. He's got to run the country for the next 3 years. He's got to build some coalitions. You know, Johnson did it. You can name almost every. Bill Clinton did it all the time. I was getting calls all the time from him. I'm exaggerating. I caught calls periodically when it mattered, and he was smart to call. But he got my help.
But this president isn't going to get any coalition, certainly not across the aisle. Look, the reaction that this president has gotten since day one, questioning his legitimacy, whether he's an American, questioning his religion.
So
I mean,
not all Republicans are like
I'm
that.
not saying
there are so many Republicans there that would welcome the call.
The Tea Party.
Right,
but do you really think that he can form any coalitions with anything other than a Democratic House?
Yes,
absolutely. Because I think that may have to be his end goal if he wants to get anything done from here on out.
He can never get something done because he won't control the Senate.
Let's dip in right now to Washington, guys, for a second. This is Harry Reid's, obviously. Let's take this. This is live.
Around America today, millions of people, in the first few hours of the ability to sign up, rushed and overburdened a number of places. The websites. This is good news for America. Good news for America. I also say these are the same people. I read a direct quote. Sorry I don't have it with me, at an event I did earlier today. In 1961, Ronald Reagan talked about Medicare. That they were going, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close.
And it's a perfect way to segue here. He's talking, the Senate Majority Leader is, about the first day of affordable health care, Obamacare, and the numbers of people, both online and in person, that went to sign up for it. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Obamacare. And in addition, I want to ask you at home the same question that is being calculated right now throughout the halls of Washington, and that is, who gets blamed for the government shutdown here? And you can sound off by going to social media, either Twitter or Facebook. Please make your opinion heard. All right, when we come back, we'll talk about those Obama exchanges here. And also a question for the table. What will victory and failure look like? Even at day one, two different people can look at the same situation and declare victory for their respective sides here. We're going to talk short-term and long-term right after this.